All right then, so the level 7 research scientist. Things that we're going to cover this morning. So if you're not familiar with SIAS, we will go through who we are and what it is that we do. As I've said, we're going to talk about the research scientist, and we've got the standard and endpoint assessment methods. And what I've done here is broken them down a little bit further so we can have a look at generating the project report, the presentation and questioning, the professional discussion, and the portfolio of evidence. So remember, that's 2 discrete assessment methods we've got there. We're then going to think about the guidance documentation and forms that SIAS provide in order to help you and your apprentices sort of along that training period and to the endpoint. And then think about working with the employer to prepare for endpoint assessment. Okay, and as I've said, we've got some questions there at the end. So if you do want to ask anything as we're going through, please just put it in the question box and those will be the first ones that I answer when we get there. Okay. So, who are SIAS then and what do we do? Well, we are the Science Industry Assessment Service and we specialise in endpoint assessment for roles within R&D, production engineering, analytical services across manufacturing, science and health sectors. All right. We were set up in response to obviously the Science Trailblazer Group, and we have sort of always stayed true to our roots in terms of the science, hence bringing on the level 7 research scientist standard. So although we've branched out slightly, we do still focus on that science element. Well, what do we do then? Well, we design all of the assessment tests in line with the assessment plan that is produced on the Institute for Apprenticeships website and put together by the Trailblazer groups. We deliver all of those assessment tests and quality assure them as well. We will also register the independent assessors who will come onto your site to facilitate and assess the endpoint assessment. And it is our responsibility now as the endpoint assessment organisation to claim the apprenticeship award as well. Okay, so by the time you receive in writing from us your apprentice's endpoint assessment result, we will have applied to the government for that certificate. Okay, so then what do we do? Well, as I've said, we cover quite a broad range of sectors. So we've got the science manufacturing process operative at level 2, the engineering operative at level 2, and the lean manufacturing operative at level 2. Moving into the level 3 standards, we've got the science manufacturing, lab technician, the industry maintenance, and the maintenance and operations technician. And then we have the higher level degree standards, and that's where you might be familiar with us, particularly people who have attended today's session. You might be already familiar with some of these. So we've got the technician scientist at level 5, which takes place of the retired lab scientist, the initial one that came out. We then have the new lab scientist, which is the degree apprenticeship. We've got the science industry process plant engineer, and then obviously the research scientist that we're going to discuss in a little bit more detail just now. So then, the level 7 research scientist. So we're thinking about planning, leading and conducting scientific experiments and analysing those results. It is a level 7. Maximum funding band is 18,000. And in accordance with the assessment plan, we've got about a 30-month training period, which we've equated to about 130 weeks. And typically the EPA will follow in 3 months. And we've said that process can be about 13 weeks. Okay. We are looking for gateway requirements of, so there is no mandated quals here, but we are looking for a minimum of level 2 in English and maths. So you are thinking GCSEs or functional skills, a portfolio of evidence. And as I said, right at the top, we're going to touch on what that looks like, how we present it, and all of that kind of thing. And then an employer sign-off. And there's quite a heavy focus on an employer sign-off across all of the assessment methods on this one. And again, we'll touch on that and then we'll bring it back up at the end just to make it clear, that requirement there. So as I've said, we've got 2 distinct assessment methods. That can be graded a fail, a pass or a distinction. So if your apprentice or your candidate is looking to go for distinction, they must be distinctive across both stages of assessment. All right. So we've got stage 1 is the project report. So that's based on the work-based project. A presentation of that followed by question. And then the stage 2 is the professional discussion that's underpinned by a portfolio of evidence. All right, so we're going to start with stage 1 and then talk about stage 2. There is no hard and fast rules about the order in which these are done. Okay, we can do them in any order, but just for the sake of today, I'm going to talk about stage 1 and then stage 2. So the project report, I'm going to break this down first of all into what this is all about then. So our project report, or your apprentice's project report, it is designed to be able to demonstrate their application of knowledge and skills as they would in their occupation. All right, so it's looking to collate all of their research findings, look at their analysis of that, the synthesis, evaluation and literature review, and give some recommendations for the business to consider. It should be quite a vast project. However, we are not suggesting that, you know, this should be a project that is going to be specifically purely and only for endpoint assessment. It should be something that comes out of the workplace as the apprentices are going through. And it should be produced, the project itself should be worked on during that APA period. All right, it needs to be carried out in the workplace. Things that we're thinking of when we're talking about putting a project together, any new products or new processes, process improvements or efficiency improvements, think about cost reductions. So that could be the work-based project, and actually the project report will then come into the end. Okay, we're thinking about something that is between 4 and 4,400 words, and we must have an annex at the end that has got a minimum of 10 pieces of evidence that's relatable to that project, the knowledge, skills and behaviours, and attributable to that apprentice as well. And it must be signed off by both the apprentice and the employer. Okay, so the employer is going to come quite a bit in this in terms of a sign off, and as I've said right at the end, we'll talk about what, you know, the role of the employer and what that looks like. If we just cast our eyes over this, then if we're thinking about, and I've put the gateway in here just so we can understand the time frame of events. But what we're thinking about when we're needing this project report, that title and scope must be submitted to us 4 weeks before the gateway. All right. At gateway, we're thinking about submitting a portfolio of evidence. All right. Now, this portfolio of evidence underpins the professional discussion. So I am going to talk about that in a second, but this was just so you can have a nominal timeline of events, so to speak. We then want that project report to be submitted 3 weeks before the APA date. And then a project presentation again, 3 weeks before the APA. All right. So we're looking for a title and scope 4 weeks before the gateway. We then hit gateway. We're thinking about 3 weeks beyond that, we're wanting the project report submitted and the presentation as well. All right. Now, just so we can see the timeline in a little bit more detail here, what I've done is I've broken down, we've got the 130 weeks on programme, and I hope you can see this graphic all right. And then we've got the sort of 13-week APA period bolted onto the end there. So you can see we've got the start of the apprenticeship. So we're thinking about planning and carrying out the work-based project during the apprenticeship, okay? Before that gateway period, we are thinking about submitting the title and the report, the project scope and title to SIAS, and SIAS will confirm that within a week of receiving it. Yep, that is great, or actually this would be an alternative suggestion we would think would be better, okay? The work-based project report should be written post-gateway, okay? And then it should be submitted, submitted about 100, well, we've said, what's that? 130, about the 132 week period. All right, so we're thinking about 2 to 3 weeks beyond that, alongside the subject presentation as well. And then actually right at the end there in the following few weeks, we've got the APA project report and the presentation in questioning. So just so we've got an overview, that's what our project timeline should look like. Okay. Now then, if we're thinking about the presentation and questioning, so this project report is submitted. And then that gives our time for our SIAS assessor to the IEPA to then review it, have a little look through it. The presentation around that then should last about 30 minutes. And this will be followed up by 30 minutes of questioning, which is going to include a minimum of 12 questions. So you will notice there's quite a tight turnaround time on that. Okay, we've got 30 minutes there to include 12 questions. We've given some quite specific guidance about what that presentation should cover. So we are looking for a summary of the project report, all right? What do we want in there? For that 30 minutes, what should that apprentice be talking about, okay? Well, we want a summary of the project report, including the scientific principles of the selected technique. It's important that we include the science in this, all right? An explanation of how and why the specific techniques and criteria have been selected and why they sort of satisfy the stakeholder needs or why the apprentices decided to use that. We're looking for their research methodology and any insight and innovations that have been collated into this. Any project management that has taken part across this research plan. So how do we monitor the progress? Has there been Gantt charts? Has there been regular meetings? All of that kind of thing. We're thinking about data management. So how has that data been managed? Any improvements moving forward? And then recommendations and how they meet the business objectives. We are looking for a critical evaluation of the project and relevant literature that sits alongside that. Okay. And as I've said, this should be submitted to SIAS 3 weeks prior to the endpoint assessment. That just gives our SIAS Assurer time to review it and then put some questions together that will be part of the question aspect. All right, so we've got some quite specific guidance in there as to what we require during that presentation. Okay. If we think then about the professional discussion, so the professional discussion, that is going to cover any of the KSBs that aren't likely to come up during the project, basically. All right, and we just, you know, research scientists should be able to discuss their findings and talk about their experiences of work and the projects that they've been working on. So we want them to be able to do that via professional discussion, to be able to demonstrate their competency using their real life examples from the workplace. Okay. Again, we've got a 60-minute duration with a minimum of 8 questions, so it is a fairly tight turnaround on time. Please bear in mind that the time it takes to ask the question, because of the level of the standard, these questions might be a little bit more complex. Therefore, we are looking for a level 7 standard of detail. That won't be taken into the assessment time. Okay. This will be based on a professional competency training and development portfolio of evidence that must be submitted at Gateway. This portfolio is not marked, but it is again reviewed by the SIAS. Sorry. It is reviewed. Sorry. It is reviewed by the SIAS IEPA to be able to inform this professional discussion. Okay, and think about the questions that they're going to be asking the apprentice. So when we're putting that professional discussion timeline together, we've got the start of the apprenticeship. We need to then generate a portfolio of evidence. And the next slide is going to talk about, what that portfolio of evidence should include, how we submit it, and things like that. It should include research projects, training development activities, and performance reviews, and it should all be attributable to the apprentice. That must be submitted at Gateway, and as I've said, that will inform the endpoint assessment professional discussion. So, portfolio of evidence itself then, it must contain at least one piece of evidence mapped clearly to each of the knowledge, skills and behaviours, and we do fully appreciate that there might be one piece of evidence that matches to more than one KSB. All right, so we're thinking about typically having about 15 pieces of evidence here. What we need the apprentice to do for each of the KSBs that a piece of evidence hits or covers, we need the apprentice to make a reflective statement about how they have fulfilled the requirements of that using that piece of evidence. So what does that piece of evidence show? How does it align to the KSBs? What was your impact into that? What did you do that made that piece of evidence not only attributable to you, but why do you think it matches the KSBs? All right. So it's a clear statement about the apprentice's role within the evidence generation and how it matches the KSB that it's been assigned to. Okay. So it's very much down to the employer and the apprentice to be able to put that portfolio of evidence together or generate those pieces of evidence and then see how they match. Okay. Some of the evidence sources that we can look at should be work again undertaken by the apprentices, but might be supported by client feedback, witness testimonies, employer or trainer feedback, training records, appraisal records, training course completion. The list is absolutely not exhaustive. You might come up with some things of your own, but whatever that piece of evidence is, the apprentice must say, what was their role in that? What is this piece of evidence showing us? Which knowledge, skill and behaviour does it relate to? Okay. We don't accept, and reflective accounts and self-evaluation are not permissible, so we can't include those into this portfolio of evidence. All right, but we are thinking about circa 15 pieces that would give us the broad spectrum of knowledge, skills and behaviours that are assessed via this method. So then, if we think about this portfolio of evidence in a little bit more detail, it needs to be sent into us at Gateway in an electronic format, so in a PDF format. We also want this to sit alongside an up-to-date CV and a current job description, all right? And this is just so we have full visibility of that apprentice, their workplace and their work history, okay? As we've said, each piece of evidence supplied must be authentic and clearly relate to the apprentice, okay? If it's not clear, let's say we've got some client feedback, the statement that sits alongside that needs to say what the apprentice's role was in generating that, okay? It must also be produced during the apprenticeship period, so we can't consider things that have been completed outside of the training period, okay? As we've said, it needs to be cross-referenced to each of the appropriate knowledge, skills and behaviours, and we need that identified in the top right-hand corner of the document, okay? If there's multiple there that it relates to, we would just ask you to identify them all in that top corner. All of the information that is presented needs to be easy to follow, okay? And this is in terms of the labelling as well. Please make sure that whatever your piece of evidence is, it is clearly highlighted as to what KSB or KSBs it relates to, okay? We expect the pages to be numbered and in order. And what we have is the employer and the apprentice signs off against that, okay? And at the end, I've got some bits on documentation, or just in a second actually, that will allow us to sort of think about how the employer will do that. But the employer must sign off the portfolio of evidence just to authenticate it, okay? So you will notice throughout here, we've got quite a big input from the employer just to say, yes, you know, this is right, this has been authenticated by myself. So, the guidance documentation and the forms that we've got to complete then. So, information is provided to the employers, the providers and apprentices on registration to SIAS, okay? So as soon as you register your apprentice, the guidance and the documents, so all of the forms that we require complete, and I'm going to show you them right now, they will be released to you straight away, okay? What we've done is we've put them together in an overall guidance documentation, which talks you through each of the assessment methods, what's required for all of those. So putting the work-based project together, thinking about what that project may be, what should it look like? Thinking about the project report, okay? So the project report is based on the work-based project. Remember that work-based project is going to be done during the training period. It is the project report that's then submitted after the gateway part, okay? We then need to think about the presentation in question, and that follows off this project report. And then we have the second assessment method, which is the professional discussion, followed up with the portfolio of evidence. So what we've put together is an overall guidance document that walks you through each of those I'm not going to call them assessment methods, but each of those areas of assessment methods, let's say, and then the appropriate forms that you would need to fill in along the way there. All right. So if we think about then the work-based project, so the employer, as we said right at the beginning, the employer submits the title and scope of the project to SIAS before gateway. Okay. This is the form that we're going to issue you with to say, okay, then what is this title and scope? What's it going to be? Give us a bit of an overview. So we will send this out. As I've said, this will come out to you on registration. So you will have this right from the beginning. Obviously, we do ask for end dates anyway up front in terms of a registration. So we will give you a guide there, but equally I would like you to sort of stay on top of that. So when it comes into the time, when it's coming up to endpoint assessment time, you know, we'll drop you an email just to say, is your apprentice still on track for this end date? You can give us that bit of advice. We would then expect this to come in, as I've said, 4 weeks before the gateway. This gives us time. We have a week then to say, yeah, that is great, or no, indeed, you need to change it. This is what it should be going along the lines of. All right, so you can see there, obviously I've just made it bigger for the purposes of this, but we've got the title and the scope there, hypothesis and any research methodology and scientific processes that have been applied, a summary of the stage covered by the project, an overview of the tasks and responsibilities undertaken by that apprentice. Okay, and then we've got a little bit there, so for our SIAS EPA, they can put some comments based on that. Okay. Following that then, obviously, we expect that project report to come in, and as I've said, it needed to have an annex in there of up to 10 pieces of evidence that will support what's in that project report. We'll notice there, so this is again submitted by the apprentice, but again signed off by the employer. So you will notice at the bottom, the employer must again authenticate it. What we are looking for now is that the apprentice can say, okay then, right, this is my project report. These are the pieces of evidence I've got, and this is how these pieces of evidence relate to the knowledge, skills and behaviours aligned to this assessment method. Okay, so again, when we've provided with that document, the guidance documentation rather, we're quite clear in all the knowledge, skills and behaviours, as is available on the Institute as well, but we're quite clear in everything that we need to see in there. Okay, you will notice again that we can have one piece of evidence here, but it might relate to more than one knowledge, skill and behaviour. Just for this, the demonstrative purposes on here, we've got, so there was a Project X meeting minutes, for example, and what did the apprentice contribute to that? Well, they organised and documented that project meeting. They had all of the relevant stakeholders present to make sure that the research methodology for the project and the development of the project plan, everybody's familiar with it and up to speed. So that is the kind of thing that we're looking for, all right? So now if we think about the nature of the standard, or at least the level of the standard, what we're seeing is here are the knowledge, skills and behaviours that are aligned to each of the assessment methods or each of the assessment sections that are a part of each method. What evidence have you generated that says that you as the apprentice have got competency in this area? And then we are looking for that the employer rather, to sign off and authenticate and say, yeah, this piece of evidence is attributable to my apprentice. And yes, they are able to do this. They are competent across this K1 and S1. Okay, so this is now putting the ownership to the apprentice to say, okay, right, what evidence have I got that says that I can do, I've got competency in this area. All right, so this has been part of the work-based project that we've got. Beyond that one then, the portfolio of evidence. Now, obviously the portfolio of evidence has its own knowledge, skills and behaviours that are aligned to the portfolio and the discussion. So what we've got down the side here is, you will see that, so we've just got K2. So this is the KSB statement. What we need the apprentice to submit, so alongside their portfolio evidence, so this is what I said about the employer and the apprentice authenticating it and making it attributable to the apprentice. We've provided a form a little bit like this. So again, this is now saying, okay then, what has the apprentice done? Where is their evidence? Okay, you generate the evidence and you tell us how you feel that this meets the knowledge, skills and behaviour that's related to this assessment method. So we want an apprentice reflective statement for each of the knowledge, skills and behaviours that come up against the portfolio evidence and subsequently the professional discussion. Okay, so we put a form together that's itemised them all, saying exactly what they are. This is only part of the form, as you can imagine. The form's pretty long, but then the apprentice needs to input into their reflective statement. Okay, then what have I done that says that I can think about management, leadership and effective communication? Okay, just a bit of a statement in there. Again, we've got a sign off from the employer at the very end to say, yes, this is attributable to the apprentice. Yes, this is correct. I am validating it. I am authenticating it. Okay. Now then, preparing for the endpoint assessment. We've talked a lot about the employer into this, or rather how the apprentice needs to generate. So they're generating the evidence. The employer must authenticate and validate against that. Okay. So the role of the employer then. We're thinking along the lines of a mentor, okay, but this should be the sort of the same person, where feasible, from the beginning of the apprenticeship right the way through until the end. Okay, the representative from the employer, they're going to meet with the apprentice at the start of the apprenticeship, and we want them to review the knowledge, skills and behaviours and work together to identify the opportunities to gather the evidence in the workplace, particularly thinking about the work-based project. All right, we appreciate, and as I've said right at the top, that you know, we don't just want a project that's there purely for EPA purposes. It should be a real work-based project that has been undertaken in the workplace to introduce new product process, improve efficiencies, things like that. So we are looking for it to be based on real life. So we want the employer to be a part of this so that they can help the apprentice, particularly if they're maybe new to the role or indeed the department, to say, okay, what projects have we got coming up? For the mentor to think about, right, is this project going to be, is it going to be able to have enough scope in it in order for the apprentice to be able to demonstrate fully their knowledge, skills and behaviours? Okay. We would suggest that review meetings between the apprentice and the employer should be organised periodically, and that would look at the apprentice's progress and be able to identify opportunities within the workplace. Now, obviously, the provider sits in this as well, okay, or sits alongside this, rather. The provider will have things to look at, like review periods and things like that. But in terms of actually putting the work-based project together and the subsequent portfolio of evidence, although the provider will be best placed to sort of look over it, check it, make sure it is hitting the knowledge, skills and behaviours, it will be the employer that identifies the opportunities, okay? And as we've talked about, it should be the employer that reviews and validates or authenticates the evidence that is submitted by the apprentice, okay? It is not from the provider, it must be from the employer, okay? So they're going to review all of the evidence gathered by the apprentice, including all of the reflective statements, and confirm that the information is accurate, and they're going to sign that off prior to any submission. So anything that the apprentice sends us, so whether that be the project report, the presentation, or indeed the portfolio of evidence, it should all be signed off by the employer as well, okay? Paramount that it is from the employer. As I've said, I appreciate the provider will be working throughout this. They'll be doing review periods. They will be there again to sort of guide the employer and the apprentice in terms of work-based projects, putting that project together, making sure people are staying on track, there is progress being made. But ultimately, the employer signs off and is the best placed party to identify the opportunities within this. So we do need someone from the employer who will be sort of ready from the outset to uptake this. Okay. Now, I did say that this would be quick today. So that there is the overview of the Level 7 Research Scientist Standard.